Bioceuticals Clinical Mastery is a new education series designed to give you the confidence to support your patients and manage common clinical presentations. Each monthly offering includes 2 one-hour sessions, the first presented by a leading industry clinician and the second offering a case study-led discussion with treatment recommendations. We're launching this series in February 2022 with a deep dive into digestive conditions, which disrupt the foundations of good health. For more details, head to bioceuticals.com.au. Hi, and welcome to FX Medicine, where we bring you the latest in evidence-based, integrative, functional, and complementary medicine. I'm Emma Sutherland, a Sydney-based naturopath, and joining us on the line today is Kelly Gibson, a naturopath and nutritionist who is passionate about children's health, as well as nurturing new mums and mums-to-be. She's here today to talk to us about demystifying working with kids as a natural health practitioner. Now, I have to say, working with paediatric patients is always the highlight of my day, as they are just pure fun and joy. So welcome to FX Medicine, Kelly. How are you?
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Absolute pleasure. Now, I would love to know a little bit about your story. So how did you end up specialising in paediatrics?
Well, I think I've just always loved working with children. I was a nanny from the age of 17 until I completed my studies as a naturopath. So looking after children has always been, part of what I love. And it's just a pleasure to work with children, an absolute privilege as a clinician. You're not only able to change their current health situation, but you can change their future by educating and preventing diseases.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I think that's so, that imprint that you can have on that child's life is quite profound. But, you don't have to be a mum to be great at treating pediatrics. I mean, it's just like you don't have to have IBS in order to treat IBS, but you just need to have like this curious and open mind to learning because it's really rewarding.
Oh, absolutely. So, I actually loved treating children long before I was a mum. And I think whilst there's a lack of paediatric postgrad education, if you want to treat children, you just have to learn and research and find a mentor that specialises in paediatrics. And that's exactly what I did.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Find a mentor who's already doing what you're doing to help you troubleshoot and help you shortcut the learnings in working with kids. But, how did you actually become successful at treating kids? I mean, it's one thing to work with kids, but how did you become successful at it?
Yeah, well, kids are my kind of people. Like, they're silly and they're imaginative and they're little sponges. So I just always gravitate to paediatric clients. And I think I've been good. I've been fortunate, you could say, that I've got a good rapport with kids. And to be honest, I don't think their parents would come back if I didn't. So, I also find that providing bite-sized, achievable treatment goals helps. It helps with successful treatment outcomes. So, if you've got a successful treatment outcome, then they're going to tell their family, they're going to tell their friends, their mother's group. And, that sort of recommendation is super powerful in clinic.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I have to say my clinic's located in the inner west of Sydney, and there's the Facebook group Inner West Mums, and we are constantly recommended on there because of people's experiences. So you're right, that word of mouth is so important in building a successful clinic and being successful at treating kids. But looking at some research, what research papers have influenced your clinical approach when working with children? Because sometimes it's hard to find good studies in peds. Mine was that 2015 study done by Dr. Mimi Tang showing that in kids with peanut allergy, using Lactobacillus rhamnosus alongside oral immunisation therapy produced, I think it was at about an 80% rate of kids being able to actually eat peanuts. And then there was some follow-up data on those kids showing that they they were still able to eat peanuts. And I mean, I found that groundbreaking because it just shows that probiotic strain is moderating the immune response. So what's really impacted you on that research side and bringing it to clinic?
Yeah, look, there was this study done in Japan which looked at prenatal exposure to environmental chemicals. And they looked at the cord blood and the maternal urine, the maternal blood, and also the amniotic fluid. And the results clearly show that the pregnant women and their fetuses had really high levels of perfluorinated compounds and phthalates and heavy metals. And, this study was the perfect example of Walter Crinian, who is a man that, I don't know if you know him, but he's a man that has opened up my eyes to research and learning the effects of environmental chemicals.
Yeah.
So, as a result, I screen all my preconception and pregnant clients so that they minimise their exposure and therefore lessen the toxicity burden on their future children.
Yeah, it's a huge area, isn't it? That preconception health and, that sort of low tox living movement. I think once people become parents, it really opens their eyes to the sea of chemicals that we are swimming in and just what they can do to reduce their exposure. Anything from skincare products to, choosing pesticide-free fruit and veggies from the local markets. But people are really impacted once they become parents. But the research absolutely backs it up. And that study sounds amazing. We will definitely put a link to that study in the show notes. So if you
great.
Yeah, I think that would be great to have that.
Yeah.
And when you're working with kids, you've also got to be practical. So when you do see kids face to face, what did you have to set up in your clinic so that you could work with kids? Like, what does the clinic environment need to look like to be conducive to paediatric work?
Yeah, so it needs to be fun. It needs to be, you've got to have toys there and toys for all age groups, not just babies or toddlers. You've got to have, maybe some books there for older kids as well or puzzles. I don't think you can be precious about your clinic space.
Yeah, agreed.
If you've got toddlers in there, they're literally going to terrorise the place. So you've just got to be open to that and not feel, anxiety of little kids running around. So you've just got to make sure that it's a fun environment.
Agreed.
But you've also got to make sure it's a safe environment. So, on my days off, acupuncturist uses my room and I've got to make sure that everything that he uses is up high, out of reach, like needles and all that sort of stuff. I've got to make sure that everything is safe for children because as I'm typing and as I'm listening to the parents or the children, you never know who's grabbing other things that they shouldn't be grabbing. So you've just got to make sure it's a safe environment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And having that space where there are toys for all different age groups is really fantastic. I mean, we had one family come in last week and the siblings like to come and they call me the toy doctor because we've got a playroom where kids can really just immerse in that world of imagination and play. But it's also really wonderful to observe them as they're playing.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so true.
Now, what other things do you need to have? So what kind of checks do you need to have in order to work in peds? Because there's some boxes you do need to tick that are important.
Absolutely. So working with Children's Check is the most important legal document. And it's super easy to get. You just apply for it online and I think it takes about 4 weeks. Okay. But it lasts for 5 years. So that is really important to have. I think just making sure that the room is child friendly.
Yeah, absolutely. But what about when you're working online with kids? What about when you're working on Zoom like so many of us are? How do you work on Zoom with kids?
Yeah, so look, I think at the start it was quite challenging because I see lots of children with eczema or skin conditions. Yeah. And just not being able to see that in real life, I found it, it's quite challenging. But you've also got children, especially toddlers, that will not sit in front of you on a Zoom call for an hour.
They will not.
So, no. So they come and go usually during the consult. But when they're present, I'll ask them the questions. Yeah. And they're usually happy to come in and put their face up to the screen or whatever it may be that I need to see, their tongue. But what I also do, and it's really important, is get the parent to send through photos.
Yes.
So photos of the skin, photos of the tongue, the nails, and the poo.
Yeah, yes.
Always photos of the poo.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, like most people are working online at the moment. Yeah, so I just feel like as long as you can visualize, you can see the child for a little bit and talk to the child a little bit, then, you know, the consult is fine doing it via Zoom.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a very different experience. You know, I find it very different compared to when I've got a little person in front of me because of how much more I can observe from them. But it's actually surprising, you know, working on Zoom, how much you can glean from them. And I couldn't emphasize enough the fact that parents need to send you pictures. I mean, the amount of stool pics that I receive is astounding. If anyone ever found my phone and looked through the pictures, they'd think I was some crazy lady. But it's so critical for us to actually see these things. And I'm always saying to parents, you know, it doesn't matter if you think it's nothing, just send me a pic so I can have a good look at it myself. Or even a little video of the child is also helpful.
Yeah, that's great.
But when you're working with them, you know, you've got the child in front of you and then you've got the parent or the guardian or the grandparents or whoever's sort of caring for that child. How do you decide who to actually speak to?
Yeah, it's a great question. I always speak to the child first.
Okay.
You know, even little babies, when they come in, I always, you know, see the babies and give them a little hi.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always speak to the child first. Now, quite often it will take a little while for kids to warm up, especially that 1 to 3. That 1 to 3 age group, it takes a little while. So often you're guided by the parent. And, you know, some children may not even speak to you the entire consult.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you at the second one, they're excited to be back and they will see you. So often the parents will send me an email prior to the initial consultation.
Oh, great.
You know, just to talk through things that they want to address but may not want to talk about while the child is there, which is totally fine and really helpful. But yeah, always address the child first.
I love that because that's also, to me, it's just respectful. It's just engaging. And when we're talking about, and we'll get into this in a bit, but when we're talking about gaining compliance and buy-in from kids, they have to feel involved. And I think in my experience, children of all ages feel very special when you're talking to them or you get down on their level and you have you're playing with the blocks with them for a minute, or you ask them to do you a drawing and show you, which I do online as well. There's a lot of ways that you can really engage and build rapport with that child. I think that no child is too small to be spoken to, but then you've also got to navigate the parents and the family dynamics, and it is an art, but one that, you know, you just need practice at. So if there's people out there listening that are a little bit hesitant about working in this field of pediatrics, I just urge you, don't be. You know, just dive in. You know, the kids will teach you everything you need to know, essentially.
Oh, absolutely. You just have to be open. You've got to be open to their world.
Yes, it's a really good reframe. I like that. But what happens when, you know, the family dynamics start to get in the way? So how do you deal with it? Because some families are extremely complex and you've only just met them or you only have known them for a short time, and we're not always aware of the full dynamics, but you can feel it. What do you do when those family dynamics get in the way? How do you address that?
Oh, yeah. Look, I do see this all the time.
Okay.
And I have found that making it really clear on their treatment notes gives the parents the ability, you know, to show the grandparents or even the partner why they have to stick to this plan.
Yeah.
You know, especially they're spending so much money on testing and supplements and taking the time to remove foods or, you know, if it's an intolerance. So, yeah, it can definitely be tricky, but I just find, like I'll say a million times, just giving, you know, really clear, bite-sized, achievable goals that the parents can stick to and the grandparents can stick to, and also kind of painting like the worst kind of picture. Like if you don't do this, if you don't remove this food, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I've written letters to daycares. I've written letters to grandparents, explaining what we're doing and why, because sometimes, it has to come from the third party, and that's you. And I agree with you. Giving them very clear, bite-sized instructions is really important. There's nothing worse than having a very complex treatment plan in a pediatric case. It just confuses everybody and makes things a lot more arduous than they probably need to be. But
exactly.
Most people are a little bit worried sometimes that they're going to slip up or make a mistake. I mean, how do you address those concerns?
Look, I think slip-ups are, totally normal. In fact, I would say that, every food intolerance child that I treat, there's always going to be slip-ups.
Yes.
So I don't give them unattainable timeframes.
Okay.
And I just let the parents know that flare-ups are going to happen. If your child is going to slip up and you're going to give your child, say, dairy on weekends, I am strict with them.
Yeah.
I am strict, but you do have to allow for slip-ups. And also you need to kind of encourage the parents that it's okay, because otherwise they just feel really guilty.
Yes. Oh, my gosh. I think parents feel guilty when, they haven't done anything, and parents naturally feel guilty because it's such a sense of responsibility when you have a child. But really normalising, I love that you really normalise that slip-ups do happen, but you do need to move on and just sort of say, well, that was then, this is now, what can we do now?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, so for you, I mean, paediatrics spans quite a number of years in a child's life. You've got the babies that are under 12 months. You've got the toddlers that are ranging from 1 to 3. Then you've got kids from 4 to 8 years. And then, of course, the tweens from 8 to 12. And then finally the adolescents from 13 to 18. So each of those sort of sub-demographics are quite different. And so what do you feel are the main differences between those subgroups of pediatrics?
Yeah, okay. So, under 12 months, this age group is pretty much almost always treating the gut, and treatment protocols are really simple and usually given via the mum, particularly, in the early months. I see lots of colic and reflux and cradle cap and eczema, skin rashes. But I find that the healing time frame is very quick. And then, you've got the toddlers, like the 1 to 3, and this is where I see lots of food intolerances.
Yeah, I would
constipation.
Agree.
Yeah. Again, skin stuff, fussiness, sleep issues, but the time frames in this age group are much longer. And I think that's because children, they've grown into their own little personalities. Their favourite words usually no or yuck. And so compliancy can be really tricky. So I definitely find that this age group is more challenging.
I would definitely agree with that. And I actually, even though this can be a challenging demographic, I actually secretly really love working with these toddlers. You know why? Because they're
totally
defiant and they're so absolute in their defiance. But it's like I just love to win them over and to get them on board. It's just this ultimate challenge. But they're also the ones to me that, they really can make some profound changes. And when you're looking at that gut health and how pliable it still is at that age, there's a lot of amazing work that we can do in those areas that you mentioned you see a lot of, the food intolerances, the constipation, the eczema, and the sleep. Sleep really does become a prominent issue around that time frame as well. And often, as we see in naturopathic medicine, you might work on the gut, but then you'll see the sleep starts to shift as well. There's all these beautiful interlays between what you can do and then what starts to improve.
Yeah, absolutely, Em. Like that is exactly right. 4 to 8 is also a really great age to work with. I find that that's possibly the easiest age group.
Right.
And you've got to use the correct language here. So they need to understand what is happening and why it's happening and how they can feel better.
Yeah.
So I do think that language is key. And in this group, conditions tend to be more chronic, so harder to treat. You've got behavioural issues, anxiety, lots of poor immunity, which kind of goes across all age groups at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah.
Constipation, food intolerances. I feel like molluscum, right? Every second child has molluscum in this age group at the moment.
Yeah.
Respiratory issues and definitely poor gut health. But, I do feel like they're the most compliant age group to work with.
Yeah, I actually would I have to agree again. And you know why I think this is because at this age group their imaginations are wild and they can express themselves quite well. And if I can find out from that child what their, superhero is or what their hook is, like what do they want? Do they want to, jump like Spider-Man? You can really use that languaging and those themes through your language with the child and through your treatment programs. And do you do those kind of things? Give us some examples.
Yes. So pretty much every herb mix that I make for this age group, I get the child to name it. So last week, on the weekend, I had unicorn cold defender. A little girl made that up. She chose her unicorn cold defender. I always get like Spider-Man and for that younger group, I often say Bluey or, it'll be something to do with Bluey or this is Bingo's eye drops or whatever it may be. You've got to relate it back to something that they love. But I always get them involved in naming their supplement or naming their herbs and they love it.
I think that's
their little superpower.
Yeah, Cal, that is such an amazing strategy because it gives you instant buy-in and they get instant ownership of the process by naming it. I love that strategy. That is one that everyone listening can take away and implement, the next day they're in clinic. That's brilliant. Thank you.
And so what I would often do, though, with this age group, in fact, with most of them, a week after the initial consult, I'll call and leave a voice message for that child, addressed to that child, and just say, hey, Fred, I just wanted to check how your superhero drops are going. Is it making your tummy feel better? Or something like, how many vegetables did you eat this week? Or how many different vegetables did you eat this week? And they love it. They love it. I often get little cute messages back, which is so sweet.
That is adorable. And I love that you're following up in that way. That is such a great way of bringing the child once again into feeling really important and special and that you really care about what, about them and the situation and how they're going.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what about the tweens? What about the tweens? Because how do you find this age group to work with?
Look, I would say similar to 4 to 8.
Okay.
But they have more mood, more mood issues, more anxiety, a lot more anxiety I'm seeing in this age group, lots of gut issues as well.
Yeah, I would, the levels of anxiety in this age group in the last, 12 to 18 months is much higher than I've seen in 17 years. These tweens are really impacted heavily by anxiety, I think, or they're more susceptible to feeling anxious. So it's something for us to, keep our radars on. And, if you're treating adults that have children, maybe, between 8 and 12, maybe you could just check in with the parent and say, hey, how's your child going? Do you think they're suffering anxiety or do they need any support? So just doing some checking in if their parents are your patients as well and you're not currently working in peds is an easy in as well.
That's exactly right. And especially obviously children going back to school at the moment. I would be asking all my adult clients how their children are going. Yeah. Because, it's absolutely incredible how many children are suffering from anxiety at the moment.
Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns for them, I guess, which compounds that. And then what about the adolescents? So these are the 13 to 18-year-olds, and I sort of love working in this space because they're like mini adults, but often they're hostages. And what I mean by that is their parents have just booked them in, and their parents might be seeing you or might not be, and have just booked them in and kind of plonked them in front of you. And it's a bit awkward.
It is awkward. Look, I don't treat many teenagers, but the ones I have, like the parents are obviously always there, and they don't necessarily want to talk.
Yeah.
So the roles are reversed. The parents are doing all the talking, yet I'm trying to, ascertain how they're going, but the children won't necessarily talk. Look, teenagers, I always get emails from parents prior to this particular age group. And because a lot of it is, for acne, mood, hormonal issues.
Yeah.
Like these are, prepubescent and going through to puberty. And I definitely see lots of hormonal issues, lots of stress and anxiety. And one thing with this age group, though, is that they have their own money. So they're buying their own food, and quite often it's junk food.
Yeah.
They're coming in with their own ideas as well. They've seen certain supplements that work for other people on social media, and so they have their own ideas as well. Yeah, so it's a tricky age group to work with, I find.
Yeah, it is tricky because if they're a hostage, they're sitting there with their arms crossed or they're not engaging at all, and the parent is talking at you at a rate of knots. But often I will, in those moments, and I can see that, it's just not going well, I will actually stop and say to the parent, do you mind stepping out while I have a chat to, Sarah? Would that be okay with you? And then 99% of the time the parent's like, oh, okay. And they say, oh, yeah, sure. Actually, no, that's fine. And then they leave, and then, we'll have a chat to said Sarah, and you'd be amazed at what comes out. And, emailing the parent afterwards and communicating via email before and after appointments with this age group is absolutely critical because there's a lot of sensitivity at this age. And it's sensitivity about, they might say something to you that their parent doesn't want to know, like, yes, I'm buying Kit Kats, after school every day, and I'm telling mum I'm not. We see that a lot with this age group, but it's that sense of independence and identity that they're trying to grapple through making their own food choices. So there's a lot of subtleties in paediatric work between the families and the child themselves.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so working with all these different age groups, if you had to pick, what ones do you think you get the most success in?
Ooh, the most success? I would say the 4 to actually I would say the baby, so under 12 months.
Yeah.
But also the 4 to 8 group.
Yeah.
And I think compliancy is just, babies have no choice, right?
Yeah.
we're just syringing it in or mixing it into their yogurts. Whereas, and the 4 to 8, like I said, if you are very clear with your language and get them involved, then I always have success treating that age group.
Yeah, that's such a good clinical insight. So, for everyone listening, if you wanted to get started, maybe start with the 4 to 8 age bracket, because that is one that is sort of more open and easier to work with. But what about languaging? I just want to talk about languaging for a minute, because I think it's so critical when you're working in pediatrics. And how do you discuss things with parents without making them feel guilty? They may be saying, don't eat that food, it's a bad food. But saying that may be causing some shame in their child. And I mean, some parents are just trying to reduce conflict at the end of the day and give their kids nuggets. And other parents might be super restrictive with their kids. So how do you navigate this with the languaging?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, it's a fine line between making the parent feel guilty about food choices and educating them. I find that understanding chemicals in processed foods, it's a really good leverage for me to explain to parents why they are better off making their own chicken nuggets or burgers or whatever it may be. And I think when you have a family with, say, food issues or nutritional food intake, I always ask what their top 3 go-to fast foods are or their least nutritious foods are, and I offer alternatives and recipes. So I make it really simple for them. Most often that works really wonderfully.
Yeah.
Sometimes, it can still be a bit of a challenge. And with the super restrictive parents, I just feel like they need reassurance that it's okay for a child to experience cake and chocolate and, like in an ideal world, unless it's something that they, there's a health issue and they can't have that.
Yeah.
But I just feel like in an ideal world, we would be enjoying everything in moderation, and the food, like I just explained to the parents, it's not a good or bad food. It's whether it's harming or whether it's healing. And they usually get it most of the time.
Yeah, I really love that statement. Is this food healing or harming? So rather than good or bad, it's just sort of softening the edges around it there, which is really important for parents. And I mean, what if that family's nutrition literacy is compromised? Because when you work in pediatrics, you end up changing the whole entire family meals. So how do you work with that?
Yeah, so in most cases, I do have to paint the worst picture and be really, really honest.
Okay.
Like the reality is it actually is easier for the whole family to remove, say gluten or egg or dairy. That way you're only preparing one meal and it avoids, I guess, slip-ups
Yes.
of problematic foods. But I always offer resources. You need to offer guidelines and be specific and make sure that you're preparing them with, resources and recipes. And, if it's not a food intolerance problem but an overall dietary improvement, then I just start with simple, achievable steps.
Okay.
I don't overcomplicate it and work with them.
Yeah, I think the overcomplication is where people kind of automatically go, oh, it's too hard, I can't do anything.
Yes, absolutely. I just find providing them with, you've also got to get them to do their own research. So rather than giving them 4 pages of things that is just way too much and overcomplicated, give them resources, give them, say, 3 recipes and, 5 guidelines and some recipes to go and do their own research.
Yeah, I think resources are one of the biggest things that I get asked for, and we provide in clinic, for families and parents, because they do need a lot of hand-holding and a lot of reassurance. So really clear resources is imperative.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to dive into infantile colic because it is so common. 30% of babies are affected by it. And due to the amount of crying a colicky baby does, it is no wonder that colic is associated with higher maternal depression scores in the literature. And, the research on probiotics is absolutely compelling. So, for example, a meta-analysis on Lactobacillus reuteri, DSM 17938, showed it reduced crying times at 2 and 3 weeks. And the proposed mechanism was that the probiotic had an anti-inflammatory effect on the gut lumen. Now, interestingly, research also showed the same probiotic strain reduced both parental discomfort as well as the number of visits to the pediatrician due to the infantile colic. So really compelling data that we've got. And I'll tell you one thing, when you have a colicky baby and you have the parents in front of you, the parents are usually either crying or highly anxious because they're so sleep deprived and they cannot stop this, insufferable crying that's happening. So in your experience, what do you find effective for treating colic? What are some tips you can give to our listeners?
Yeah, okay. Look, I see colic babies every week. There's just, there's a real need for naturopathic treatment. Lots of babies are on protein pump inhibitors. And, as a naturopath, it's really concerning because they come with their own issues and side effects. So, especially prolonged use of them.
Yes.
But when I would say 80% are medicated when they come in. Okay. And if you say to a parent, okay, we're going to take the baby off the medication, you just see the fear in their eyes because you know what they're going through.
Yeah.
But I definitely use probiotics, particularly like Lactobacilli reuteri. And, you know, obviously there's loads of research. So you can show the parents, this is why I'm giving this to you.
Yeah.
Definitely probiotics. I also use a lot of homeopathics as well and herbs with colic babies and slowly reduce the medication.
Yeah. So obviously collaborating with their pediatrician or GP or whoever they're working with in that environment and just going slow and really working on the research-backed therapies that we have in our toolkit, which is,
absolutely.
There's quite a few. Now, what about this 2019 government report titled Australia's Children came out, and listen to these stats, right? When we're talking about vegetables and kids, said the proportion of children aged 5 to 14 eating an adequate amount of vegetables in 2018 was only 1 in 25. 4.4% of kids were eating the amount of vegetables they needed to. And, you know, this age group were eating 1 to 2 serves of vegetables a day instead of the recommended 5. That's a big difference. So my $1 million question is, how do we get kids to eat what they need to in order to meet their macronutrient and micronutrient requirements?
Yeah, so look, this is really frightening. I mean, there's definitely a lack of vegetable being consumed by our children. And I find the only way to improve that is obviously with education. So, you know, we're programmed to think that we need to eat breakfast foods and cereals in the morning.
Yes.
But if we can shift that mindset and get children and adults, everyone, having vegetables across the entire day. So, you know, adding spinach and zucchini and stuff like that to their breakfast omelette, just really increasing their vegetables throughout the entire day. In their lunchbox, ensure that they're having veggies. And a big one that I find is getting kids involved in either growing their own vegetables at home or, you know, joining a community garden, which are everywhere these days. Yeah. And exploring the farmers markets and choosing what foods to cook and foods to eat that week. Yeah. Yeah. I also, you've got to make sure that on a child's plate they've got their safe food, so food that they eat and happy and they're comfortable, and then adding in a new vegetable. Okay. So slowly you're adding to, you know, their taste receptors and, I just find that slowly with kids rather than just saying you need to eat this vegetable, you need to eat that. So again, language here is really key. Yeah. Just putting it there and seeing what happens as well. Now, I will say, though, that there's lots of new protein powders on the market for kids. Okay. And, you know, essentially they do provide macro and micronutrients, and some are great, but as an add-on, you know, it should never replace their vegetable intake because children need to touch food. They need to eat it. They need to, you know, learn how to cook it and prepare it, not just by hidden taste. Yeah, yeah. I think that there is a degree where you hide stuff and then there's a degree where you're transparent about it. And I always say to parents, you know, if you want your child to eat broccoli, don't give them a whole stalk, a tree of broccoli. Put like just a tiny, tiny piece of broccoli because kids are little. You forget that they're so little. So small portions of foods that you're trying to introduce are going to work much more effectively. Yeah, absolutely. Slowly. Yeah, slowly. Don't force food on children because they will just push it away. Yes, absolutely. Particularly in that 1 to 3 year age gap. Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess the question as well is, how do you actually get supplements into kids? How do you optimize compliance for them? Yeah, look, it can be tricky, especially when you're prescribing supplements or herbs that may not taste so great. It can be tricky with compliance, especially in the age group of, say, 2 to 4. Okay. But there's so many ways you can get them in. So adding them to juices and smoothies, making icy poles and jelly vitamins. Purees are awesome for younger kids. I do use like tissue salts as well. Okay. And put berries with everything. So berries seem to mask any flavour of, awful tasting supplements or herbs, I always put berries with everything. So if you're putting herbs or supplements into a yogurt, add berries on top, mix it through.
Okay.
And usually it does disguise the flavour. And one thing I will say, though, is that if you are adding a dosage of a product to, say, for instance, their smoothie, add it to a very small amount of the liquid. And then once they've drank all that up, then top it up with more smoothie. And that way you know that they're guaranteed to finish the dosage required.
Great idea.
Rather than adding it to a full cup and, the child drinking like a quarter of it.
Yes, that is such a good strategy, because that's often what happens is half gets left behind and then the child's only had half the dose that they actually need.
Exactly.
Amazing. Yeah. I love those tips. Now, what are some, top recommendations you would give to other practitioners when working in this very fun area of pediatrics? What are just some top tips?
Okay, so first of all, you've got to create a fun space for children to feel comfortable in. That's a really important one. And then create a good relationship with paediatricians or GPs. And sometimes this can be difficult, but I think it's really important to keep the lines of communication open with their specialist. So I never go into too much detail in my letters to specialists, but I used to, but they don't actually always read them. Yeah. So you've just got to keep it really simple. But having a good relationship with paediatricians is really important. And thirdly, I would say have taste testers of products if possible.
Good idea.
I always make sure, I just, if they're spending money on products and they open it up as soon as they get home and will call me and say, I've just spent, all this money on products that my children will not taste.
Yeah.
Will not take. So, some things have strong flavours. Always get children to taste them.
Yeah.
And so I always, have little taste testers there and they can just have a little taste. And, I think that's really important.
I love those tips. So create a fun space for kids to feel comfortable in. Always create that good relationship. Keep the communication open with the paediatricians and GPs by writing succinct letters. They're busy people. We don't need to inundate them with big, long stories. Exactly. And then have some taste testers of products that, you can get the kids to try before they buy, so to speak.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
And so when you first started working in this space, looking back, what's that number one piece of advice you would have told yourself with, all the experience you have now? What would you look back and say?
That's such a great question. I would say don't overcomplicate treatment protocols. Keep it simple and don't try to solve all their problems in the first consultation. I think that most new prackies will make this mistake. They're just really trying to please that client and make sure that they're providing every single bit of detail that they can. It's not necessary. Agreed. You just need to keep it very simple.
Yeah. I think that is such a clinical pearl that we should all be reminded of, is to keep it simple, especially in peds when there's so much, going on and there's compliance and there's emotions and there's, parental expectations. That's such a key piece of advice. And then, talking about the new graduate or prackies that maybe are not yet working in pediatrics, any advice for building a successful and a financially viable clinical practice? Because we need to be successful, we also need to be financially viable. So how do we do this in this area of peds? Any tips on your end?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, have a mentor, someone to talk through cases with, someone to help with further your education as well. You don't learn a lot about pediatrics, if at all, in your naturopathy degree. Yeah. So it's always, you need to find someone that specialises in paediatrics and pick their brains.
Yes.
Secondly, I would definitely say understand the back end of your business. So, don't fall behind in the admin side of things. There's lots of outsourcing that you can do here if it's something that you, is not comfortable with, like accounting and bookkeeping.
Yeah.
You can even get someone to develop your client handouts.
Yes.
Someone to help with social media. Like there's lots of assistants out there, virtual assistants. And make sure you finish treatment notes and emails, etc. So this is I think a really big one for new prackies. Make sure that it's, some days can be really overwhelming and you can be really busy, but make sure you stay on top of finishing off those treatment protocols, finishing off your client emails, and stay on top of social media. Like I have, a bit of a love-hate relationship with social media.
Yeah, understandable. I think we all do to some degree. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a really effective and free way of marketing yourself.
Yeah.
So establish good social media platforms. And then lastly, I would say yes. So this is such a huge one for me, Emma, and many other new prackies, because, saying yes to opportunities can be so daunting and uncomfortable. But when you get past it, it's just exciting and rewarding. So saying yes to opportunities.
I love that. What a great closing point. Just say yes, jump in the deep end and just give it a go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Kelly, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Your work with children is certainly so inspiring and you make it sound really easy. And I know there's practitioners out there who are hesitant to work with kids. So hopefully this has inspired them to just give it a try. And for those who are already working with children, you've really given us some amazing tips and areas to focus on. Thank you so much for your insights. They're really appreciated.
Oh, thank you, Emma. It's been fun being on your podcast today.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. Don't forget you can find all the show notes, transcripts and other resources from today's podcast on the FX Medicine website. I'm Emma Sutherland and thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. This podcast is intended as healthcare practitioner education only, and it is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.